A perfect example of this, in my opinion, is something I think a lot of you might actually disagree with me on, and that's Hollow Knight. For as great as the combat, exploration, and world is in this pseudo 2D adventure that has an adoring fanbase, one of the most frustrating things about playing it, for me at least, is how difficulty is handled a lot of the time. And what I mean by that is instances like trying to see the palace grounds or White Palace, where you have to find the monarch wings first to even get there, which for those of you that don't know, allow you to double jump at any time to reach higher spots. The difficulty in sections like this comes from the fact that I have to scour and traverse any portion of an already explored map I missed, all in search of this one item I need to progress. And this can be seen all over the game too, with other issues like locked doors that require a specific key, zones that can only be reached through oddly specific secret entrances, or items that simply lie in wait in some obscure part of a zone that are a requirement for me to move on. Challenge or suffering like this is so frustrating because it almost feels like the game has no respect for our time or intelligence. Like walking up to a locked door and realizing exactly what I need to do, but knowing I will have to monotonously search through random previously explored places again, now this time with lower intrigue, just to find what I need. Does it make the game harder? Definitely, but I would argue not in a way that actually makes it more interesting too. In contrast, a game like Deus Ex or Prey would simply show you a door that you have absolutely no idea how to open, but give you 10 different ways to do it, all of which would feel infinitely more satisfying than backtracking for 30 minutes through a previous map in Hollow Knight to find one annoying key whose purpose is already perfectly clear. Both of these scenarios provide a good amount of challenge, but only one of them challenges more than just your patience. And here's the other thing too. For as much as I personally love labor and difficulty in games, for as much meaning as it gives the whole experience, there's another side too. Because most people aren't playing games for meaning, or often even for a real challenge. Most people, whether you like it or not, just want to play a fun video game. It's really as simple as that. After a hard day at work grinding away and dealing with the constant stresses of life, the majority of gamers want to simply turn off their brain, load up their PC or console, and have a constant stream of dopamine injected into their veins. But here's the thing, I don't actually think that's exactly right. Because even for the most casual among us, even for the people who see games as nothing more than a mindless distraction, that distraction still relies heavily on challenge. Call of Duty Warzone wouldn't be fun without somewhat competent enemies on the other side. Candy Crush wouldn't be nearly as popular if it didn't constantly result in failure, and the most ubiquitous thing about Minecraft is a giant green man who runs at you and explodes, destroying everything you've spent so much time building. The real key to suffering in games is making sure to find the right balance. For example, one of the biggest controversies about StarCraft 2 when it came out was how much easier than the first game it was. Despite still being brutally difficult, tweaks to certain mechanics and how the game played overall made it a lot easier to navigate. And one of the most pressing controversies was the fact that you could select many more units at once. In the first StarCraft, the one I grew up as a kid playing with my dad, you could only select 12 units at a time, which meant in order to control your entire army and workers at your base, you had to constantly be dragging and moving your mouse around like a conductor in a symphony, even for the most basic of maneuvers. Creating hotkeys for even small bands of units was crucial for victory, and this mechanic alone sent the skill ceiling of the game into the stratosphere. But in StarCraft 2, that unit control count went to 200 at once, an over 10 times increase, meaning you could quite literally select your entire army at once and just send it into the enemy base without thinking. Before, what would have taken a small feat of genius and years of practice was as easy as a simple drag of the mouse across the screen. But you see, maybe that isn't such a bad thing after all, because in a lot of ways, this change actually made the series better. By lowering the bar to entry just enough, StarCraft 2 was able to reach extraordinary levels of success, and even though it wasn't as hard as the first game, it still managed to maintain a very high skill ceiling that most competitive games nowadays aren't even close to approaching. Sometimes suffering and struggle in games isn't about just making something as grueling and depressing as possible, but rather the exact right blend of pain mixed with elevating power. Or what about a game series like Halo? I'm sure for lots of us, our most fond memories as kids playing games were those late nights in co-op Halo lobbies enemies, trying to beat the game on the hardest difficulties, or even soloing it ourselves to get that badge of honor. But while the most sought after achievement was beating the game on the legendary difficulty mode, the hardest in the game, if anything, this mode just wasn't even that fun. Enemies are bullet sponges, a grunt tickling you might result in death, and stray bullets or random things hitting you will make you rage at the unfairness of it all. In contrast though, Heroic, the difficulty just below legendary, is often so much better. Enemies and encounters are still a challenge while not being overbearing, guns actually feel punchy and effective rather than like Nerf bullets, and you still get that satisfaction of victory because it's by no means a walk in the park in its own right. And this all culminates in an experience that arguably is better despite it being easier. Because you see, while struggle and hardship in games is so important, it's also crucial to make sure it doesn't become so overbearing to the point where it's just monotonous and pointless. Because there's always some players that will want to beat any game at the highest levels of pain imaginable. But for the general public and out of concern for good game design, usually a more toned down balance is needed. Even in games that are often seen as difficult like Dark Souls, there are certain weapons or builds that will give you a much easier time than others. And one of the key reasons people like to grind away at games but not hard things in real life is because games often have a way to make things easier, while in real life, we often don't. So I totally understand why players are so quick to dismiss the idea of difficult games, or put so little focus and emphasis into it. But deep down, I think even in cases like this, most players actually want more challenge than they even originally think. Take even a super laid-back game like Stardew Valley, where it's about as mellow as you could imagine. You simply buy seeds at the local market, plant them, and grow a garden to your heart's content. But even in such an inconspicuous romp like this one, the most memorable moments usually come from the hardship too. Your crops dying out due to weather, a crazy wizard next door you must confront head-on, or a big commotion in the town square that you have to go and check out. If Stardew truly was nothing but growing a garden with no setbacks, it would get boring so quickly. The fact that plants can die by not being watered, certain vegetables need specific conditions, and animals can come and steal from you make the entire experience so much more engaging. And funnily enough, if you really think about it, everything that makes Stardew so addicting and fun to play are the exact things that would be so annoying in our real lives. Being a farmer and having to deal with animals and the weather is an arduous experience. Trust me, I know as a kid who had a grandpa who worked on a farm. But it's that same challenge that makes playing a game fun over and over. And I think that's because even in our real lives, adversity is the bedrock for the same sense of interest and pride we get in games. Without the struggle, it would feel like nothing we were doing had any purpose at all. And this is backed by the science too. Just one of many articles I found on the National Library of Medicine, for example, at a quick glance, showed a strong correlation between those with high work engagement, what they defined as people working hard because they enjoy it, and a high ability to regulate positive emotions and good health. Cultivating a love for hard work isn't just something you can brag to your friends about. It quite literally will make you a healthier person mentally and physically over time. So even for people that just want to sit back and enjoy a game with no problems, I would bet if they really thought about it, a game with no problems or a life with no struggle wouldn't be much of a game or life at all. And to finally drive home my point, I want to give a very specific example from a game I've been enjoying quite a lot recently, and that game is Enshrouded. As of the time of writing this, the game has only been out for around a month and is still deep into the throes of early access, with surprisingly only some of the issues that tag usually brings. It takes place in the mystical world of Embervale, where you must venture forth and survive at any cost necessary, building homes, meeting NPCs, and adventuring and fighting enemies all along the way. But no matter how much I love this game, I can't help but shake the feeling that it's missing one very crucial ingredient, something that would otherwise elevate it to a must-buy status, and also something I hope I can look back on years from now to see the game's evolved into. And that is the easy difficulty. You see, over a year ago now, I actually first started falling in love with the survival genre in the first place. The only game I had played up to that point which spoke to me in any way was Subnautica, and that experience was so good that I've been fighting to find something similar ever since. Which led me down the path to play tons of survival games, all of which I found so lacking and devoid of character or actually engaging mechanics. That was, until I found Valheim. But despite how amazing Valheim and its world, crafting, and sense of adventure are, Enshrouded does so many things better. The graphics are more realistic, the art style is in my opinion more beautiful, base building is more streamlined and in-depth with the ability to even build entire underground and flying cities, along with combat, movement, and questing being miles ahead of anything Valheim has even attempted. However, there's a special sense of accomplishment and pride in Valheim that I just haven't felt in Enshrouded yet. Because the one thing that Valheim has that Enshrouded right now doesn't is an actual sense of challenging, of suffering. In Enshrouded, after spending an hour gathering materials for building or upgrading, all you have to do is simply open your minimap and teleport to your base in an instant, regardless of where you are. Whereas in Valheim, certain materials needed for crafting higher level gear can only be found in tougher biomes, and you can't teleport with those materials back. And considering all of your smelters and crafting apparatus are likely built far away in the starting zone, in order to actually bring things back to your stations to progress, you will be looking at a massive journey across land and sea, hauling thousands of pounds of stones and branches in order to make it back home. And when I say massive, I mean it. There are points in the game where you will spend literal in real life days trying to get back safely with a group of friends after work or school. And if at any point in the journey you die, you lose everything and must go all the way back and fight your way through hordes of enemies, or sometimes accept the fact everything is just gone forever. When we look at Enshrouded in comparison, it couldn't be any further from this. Even death here only involves dropping some of your materials, all of which you can simply teleport to a nearby tower and fly back to quickly pick up. And what this boils down to is the sense that Enshrouded is so much more streamlined. Death isn't as punishing, resource gathering is much less of a chore, and fighting a boss is as simple as walking up and throwing a spell at it instead of spending hours making a summoning ritual like in Valheim. And even things like building in Enshrouded are so much easier, which allows for more fantastical and unrealistic structures. While in Valheim you must meticulously place each piece, as any building could topple over at a moment's notice if there isn't enough structural integrity that you planned from the beginning. And because of all of this, Enshrouded in a lot of ways is a much easier game to get into. And when you combine that with the fact that it has core systems that in most cases are much better feeling and easier to understand, I would argue a lot of players at first glance would actually prefer it. But you see, the real magic behind Valheim, and my biggest gripe with Enshrouded, is that difficulty and struggle is actually so key to what makes games memorable in the first place, especially survival ones. Even though my first impressions and moment-to-moment gameplay in Enshrouded felt superior, I never had any strong and visceral emotions and moments like I did in Valheim. Because in Valheim, everything you do feels like an accomplishment. Every house you build, every piece of material you gather, or new zone you stumble upon genuinely gives you a sense of elation, not only because of how fun of a game it is to play, but because getting there wasn't easy. At no point during your playthrough does Valheim hold your hand or try to make things easy for you. At every step, no matter how much work you have to put to get there will be trials and tribulations that will test your mental and physical fortitude. I distinctly remember my first time playing Valheim when I originally encountered the swamp zone with my two other buddies. None of us had been here before, and because previously we were destroying goblins in the forest without a second thought, we started to feel overconfident. But the second we stepped foot into the swamps, we were surrounded by mud that slowed us down, zombies that could kill us in one hit, and an ominous mist that made it hard for us to see further ahead. And lo and behold, we died a lot. So much so that we lost all of our items and materials that we had spent over 10 hours farming for in-game non-stop, now all trapped behind enemy territory with no easy way for us to get them back safely. And in that moment, quite honestly, this really sucked. We had spent so much time working on all of our different upgrades for our characters and base, and in a moment's notice, this ruthless world stripped it all away from us. I was really pissed and came super close to just quitting on the spot right there. But you see, moments of intense struggle like this often are the catalyst for something greater. And in this instance, we banded together to gather wood to make one final boat to sail to the swamp in as a last gambit to get our stuff, our literal 6th attempt over hours of play. And it was in this last effort that we were finally able to navigate the roaring riverbeds and narrowly dodge enemy arrows to grab our things, and barely make it out alive with our boat sinking in the final moments as we swam to shore and away from danger. Times like these are what make games so great. Moments that you'll never forget with friends, or stories that you tell yourself and remember, in my case over a year later, because of the hardships you had to endure to see victory. And for as much as I'm loving Enshrouded so far, the key element that's missing is that sense of suffering that takes games from great to unforgettable. Because in Enshrouded, even little things like mineral veins replenishing every day, whereas in Valheim they disappear forever, seem like small differences. But they all add up to starkly show the problem in something that is simply fun to play versus something that creates stories that last with us forever. And by streamlining so much of what makes survival games difficult in an attempt to focus more on the adventure and gameplay, along the way, Enshrouded lost something crucial too. Not because it tried to do something different, that being a survival game less about the survival and more about the actual fun portions, but because those fun portions aren't contrasted enough by the struggles that necessitate them.